I can't believe I'm saying it, but Carlos Ocelote Rodriguez has stepped down as CEO of G2 Esports. He was initially on an 8-week suspension from the org, but after G2's application for Valorant partnership was revoked, it seems like perhaps the board decided that the damage here from his recent actions was just too severe. So let's dive in and take a look at this thing. What happened, who's at fault, and what's next for both Carlos and G2? Hey guys, before we get into the video, just wanted to ask you to please subscribe to the channel, ring the notification bell, and if you have a good time today, why not leave a like on the video? It really does help. You can also check out our Twitch channel at twitch.tv/theScore Esports, where we've got new live content all the time. We'd love to see you in chat. Okay, on with the video. So if you missed my video last week on the initial reaction to Carlos's Tate video tweet, you can check that out if you want the full context of what happened. But essentially, here's the quick summary. Carlos tweeted a video of himself celebrating G2's World Championship that showed him partying with Andrew Tate. Tate has become an extremely controversial figure online for his views on women and his paid Hustlers University program. But in August, he became an optics problem too big for major platforms to ignore, and he was banned from most of them. After Ocelote's initial tweet, he doubled down, then made a seemingly forced statement while continuing to like tweets supporting Tate or downplaying the video. G2 did apologize and said Carlos would be taking 8 weeks of unpaid leave. But then Riot did something pretty unexpected. As first reported by 1PV's Nell and confirmed by Esports' George Geddes, Riot held an emergency meeting and then removed G2 from their NA Valorant partnership program. Now you're up to speed. Let's take a look at the new developments. On Friday, Carlos tweeted a video of himself confirming that he had resigned from G2 Esports as CEO.
I can't believe what I'm about to say now, but my time in G2 has come to an end, which means that I will be stepping down from my CEO position. I know it might be a shocker for many of you, or most of you. And, trust me, this is a very hard ending to what has been otherwise a very deeply meaningful and joyful experience.
This was an incredibly shocking development, and members of the esports community weighed in on the move, with many expressing disbelief. For me, the shock seemed to sweep away reality for a moment, like a G2 Esports without Carlos. I hadn't really considered that this was a possibility that might happen. And it seems like many other people didn't consider that possibility either. I figured he'd return from the 8-week break, we'd get a more heartfelt apology, maybe talking about what he learned, and this whole thing would sort of settle down, I guess. Instead, G2 announced that Carlos had resigned, although it's quite possible, some would say probable, that he was asked to do so, especially given how he talked about it in his tweet.
And again, trust me when I say, I just feel fucking destroyed about it. You should know that.
Now, the situation would have seemed pretty unbelievable even a couple months ago. The CEO of G2, Carlos, stepping down and his org continuing on without him. I mentioned this in my last video, but G2 Esports are an incredibly talented group of people, and they made some of my favorite content in the industry focused around esports players. So in terms of having the skills to continue succeeding in esports, I have no doubt that they will be fine. Still, Carlos was a massive part of G2. He was part chaotic visionary, part Twitter antagonist, part unofficial mascot. And I have no doubt that, like many esports players, Carlos will have some fans that follow him to whatever he does next. But the recent leadership from Carlos put the organization in a pretty tough spot. On the one hand, I'm sure that they would have preferred to just keep him on board. But losing the Valorant slot on its own is a huge potential financial loss, and that's without even discussing the fact that it cost a good amount of money to even apply for the thing. I don't know exactly what the process was like, but if it was anything like the process for franchising in the LCS or LEC in League of Legends, it was extremely in-depth. I mean, like 100-page applications created by marketing, design, and writing professionals. Potentially thousands of hours of labor expended on this one thing. All of that was wasted in an instant by Carlos, and now the people who were supposed to have jobs with G2's Valorant division maybe don't. That includes players, by the way. G2 was set to acquire Xset's Valorant roster, but those players are now out of a job. Then add on all the fans who are upset by Carlos's actions, the subsequent doubling down, and his non-apology. That's damage to the brand that's not easy to revert, because Carlos offered this non-apology and continued to like tweets supporting Tate. It's actually wild that it ended like this. In the past, it always seemed like Carlos knew where the line was, and if he didn't, he was willing to admit that. And regardless of your feelings on the removal itself, I think it's fair to say that for most people, this is a nearly unforeseeable end to Carlos's time as CEO. Frankly, whatever your opinions on Carlos, and you are entitled to them, I think that he did a lot to push esports forward, using his player salary to first dream of and then build something pretty incredible. G2 Esports has been one of the most important organizations in so many titles. Their boundary-pushing content and Worlds results in League of Legends, their dynasty in Rainbow Six Siege, and their historic roster sale and constant attempts to reach the top in CSGO. Esports would look a lot different without G2 Esports, and G2 Esports wouldn't exist without Carlos. But you probably don't have to look around too hard to find the likeliest reason that Carlos was removed from his position. His actions represented a serious financial threat to the company. Now, that doesn't mean that there weren't people at G2 Esports or Riot Games that were genuinely upset by Carlos's actions. I'm positive that there were. It's not like everybody involved has zero personal convictions or something. When Riot decides to pass on G2 for Valorant's franchising plans, or G2 suspends Carlos, those decisions are almost certainly driven by money. And while neither company has the legal obligation of a publicly traded company, since they are not publicly traded, they both have that same obvious incentive. If it was demonstrably more profitable to keep Carlos where he was, call me a cynic, but I have no doubt that they would. The people with the money also typically expect you to fall in line when said money is at risk. And if you can't find it deep within yourself to do that, then you're what a balance sheet would call a liability. Okay, so then, should fans have been outraged by that initial tweet? I think that they have every right to be, but I can't really retread that entire situation in this video. I'd recommend checking out our initial Andrew Tate video or the Carlos tweet video, both hosted by yours truly, if you want more on that. I'll get the links in the description for you. Now I want to move on to the question that has been constantly asked this weekend. Was Carlos's removal just? Like, should he have been removed for his actions? And unless it was unclear, we're done with the facts of the matter itself and on to the discussion of the discussion, if you will. Now, some people have tried to paint this as getting fired for one tweet, but I think this misses the bigger picture. He tweeted something voluntarily, doubled down on it, and then showed that he was being forced to issue a statement that he didn't want to issue. He showed the org and all its sponsors that he was a potential liability, and there didn't really seem to be any remorse for his actions, only for the damage it inflicted on the org that, by the way, he still owns a substantial portion of. And now it may not even be his. A report today from Esports Maniacos claims that Carlos doesn't own any of the organization now after Riot told G2 that he was blacklisted. While we don't have a Spanish speaker on staff to sift through the 40-minute nuanced discussion, it appears that after Riot told G2 that Carlos was blacklisted, Carlos sold his shares in G2 and stepped down as CEO. Initial reactions seem to suggest that Riot specifically demanded that Carlos sell, but the later distinction that emerged was that Riot blacklisted him, meaning that he couldn't be involved in the team operations side, but G2 then asked him to divest. This was noted by lead caster Medic on Twitter. The exact situation is not clear right now, and we invite any Spanish-speaking members of our community to provide more context in the comments below if you'd like. Okay, getting back on track to talk about the discussion. Other arguments have blamed Carlos being fired on fans tagging G2 sponsors and pointing out the Tate video. this is an extremely weird argument that I don't really get. If you think that these sponsors don't have somebody that manages and follows these deals, then you're wrong. They absolutely do. And they might even have known about this whole situation before the first person tagged BMW or Logitech. Now, the last thing I saw a lot of this weekend were accusations of hypocrisy against Carlos's critics. In fact, I'd argue that this response was one of the most common to his resignation. First off, if you can prove someone is a hypocrite, that's all well and good, but it doesn't actually deal with the argument being discussed. That person might not be the best person to make that argument, but the argument itself remains intact, and somebody else could just make the same argument without the conflicts that make them a hypocrite. Now, these accusations were mostly directed at people working for a company owned by Saudis, being owned in whole or in part by Tencent, or working for Riot, who has had massive issues with workplace sexism and misogyny. Now, I can't believe I have to say this, but working at Riot Games does not mean that you can't have an opinion on Andrew Tate. The same is true of someone working for ESL, which is owned by a public Saudi company, or someone working for Tencent, which of course has links to China. Sure, you can point out the hypocrisy if you want, like, go nuts. Actually, it seems like you kind of already did. It seems like you guys really, really dug into that one. But if you don't touch the argument, you chickened out. What fans can do is draw a line on Tate, and they did. That's not bad, and it's not holier than thou or something. Listen, some people, myself included, understand how much Carlos did for esports. Some people were personally helped and reassured by a person that gave them a start or a big break in this industry. But these new actions conflict with that legacy. What Carlos did and then doubled down on understandably upset a lot of people. And that doesn't just get ignored because of his prior contributions. We can't really know what beliefs Carlos shares with Tate, if any, just based on this video. Carlos's now separated wife, with whom he spent over 8 years, did go on record to say that she had never seen behavior that would match the things that Tate advocates from Carlos. Carlos did a lot for esports, and the legacy of that Carlos will still exist. But at the same time, this final episode of his time with G2 will be a part of that legacy too. And that's something that he, his supporters, and the org that he founded will have to come to terms with. Man, fall just came out of nowhere. You know? One day I'm just wearing my Persona shirt, and then the next day I'm wearing a plaid shirt over my Persona shirt. What a shocking turn of events.